Welcome to G-Man Gaming and Reviews. Today's video is going to be a reaction video on Gamza's video called Why Space Marine 2 Failed. Now, what I am going to say is, before I watched this video, I absolutely loved Space Marine 2. I thought it was a brilliant game. I loved the story. But after watching Gamza's video, there was something that was pointed out to me that I didn't really think too heavily about until I watched Gamza's video. So we're going to do a reaction to his video called Why Space Marine 2 Failed, that literally talks about not necessarily the game itself or the gameplay, but the writing. So let's get into it.
Why, hello there everybody, and welcome to this video. So today we are talking about the absolute mess that is the writing in Space Marine 2. This game should have been epic. A lot of people that don't know about the lore really love the game. Me, who I understand more of the lore, I've been really into Warhammer 40k for a very long time, and other people who've also been into the lore for a very long time could spot a lot of these really shitty writing scenes in here. So anyways, it makes the Ultramarines, and more broadly Space Marines in general, act like petty high school kids in a soap opera. So I'm just gonna say this, okay? Just strap in, get your dislikes ready. In my opinion, this one's gonna be damn good. Gamza! Want to choose what video comes out next? Join my Patreon. Any tier $3 and up can vote whenever I post a poll. Links in the description. Alright, so we start with Lieutenant Titus, the hero who saved Gaia, or whatever that damn planet was, in the first game. So he has undergone the Rubicon Primaris transformation, like all the other named characters, because that's got to be shoehorned in there. It's like the riskiest surgery in the world that all named characters just come out spotless with, so that way they can sell you a new model, right? So anyways, he's reinstated into the Ultramarines by Marneus Calgar himself. That's the chapter master of the Ultramarines. That's the highest authority in the chapter, only below Guilliman, who's the Primarch. But he's also now the Lord Commander of the Imperium, so Calgar is still carrying a lot of weight on his shoulders. A call like that should be final, okay? There's no questions asked. Calgar looked through his record. He said that his service was impeccable and reinstated him as a lieutenant now instead of a captain, which is a lower rank. But that's Calgar's word. So, but right away, that authority gets tossed to the side by Captain Sevestus. He's the commander of the second company, okay? And he questions Calgar's choice. In the lore, this would never happen. Space...
Yeah, I'm gonna be honest. So that is 100% accurate. I understand why. Like, I'm gonna be honest, and I'm gonna say that I didn't really pay too much attention to this when I was actually playing the video game Space Marine 2 because I was along for the ride. But I do have to say that the Space Marines are not just generic super soldiers, right? There is the psychological conditioning that goes through the Space Marines on top of their physiological adaptations that get surgically attached to them, to the point that they are not really just regular soldiers. They are, I suppose you could say, conditioned soldiers, right? They are conditioned to be obedient. So one of the big premises of the first story, and I think the writing in the first story is considerably better than the writing in the second story. The reason is the writing in the first Space Marine game, where Titus has his sort of conflict with Sergeant Leonidas, I think it was Sergeant, is that Leonidas is a stickler for following the Codex Astartes exactly, like right down to the letter, right? Whereas Titus believes that the Codex Astartes is a framework for the Space Marines to understand, but they do have to learn to move beyond it, right? And so that conflict makes sense within the realm of Space Marine lore. Now, in Space Marine 2, the writers do take this much further by incorporating a scene where there's distrust between Titus and one of his squad members, right, the sergeant. But as you'll see later, whereas in the first game it was consistent with the lore, In the second game, it's just not. Like you'll see later on, the idea of a sergeant pulling his pistol on his, the idea of a sergeant pulling his pistol on a senior is just unthinkable for a Space Marine to do. So, you know, that's the thing. Like, it's just, I get why Gamza talks about it later on and he doesn't like it, because it's like, it's 100% correct. It's not consistent with the lore of the Space Marines. This isn't to say that they don't have free will, but you certainly wouldn't expect petty squabbles that go through the Space Marines to happen as you see in Space Marine 2, especially since the Horus Heresy came along and the Imperium of Man became even more focused on making sure that heresy doesn't rock the Imperium again, right? So, you know, this is the sort of behavior that you would expect from Chaos Space Marines, not from Space Marines.
Space Marines are built to obey. A captain second-guessing a chapter master, that's essentially nonsense. Now, don't get me wrong. You can give counsel to a chapter master if he allows it and he asks for it. In this case, you got this captain who's openly talking shit to Titus to his face, saying that he's got reservations about his reinstatement. Excuse me, that reinstatement was done by your chapter master, you dumb bitch. Why on earth are you questioning that? And if you're gonna question it, you bring that up to Calgar. You don't bring that up to Titus to his face. You know what this is? This is drama.
Yeah, I like, it's just not the way that, like, you know, I mean, if Akaran had problems with Titus being reinstated, Gamza is 100% correct. It would have made more sense for him to take it to Maneas Kalga rather than to bitch about it to Titus. So yeah, that totally makes sense. It's like I gotta understand, like, when I first played the game, I didn't really think too much of it because I was sort of engrossed in the fact that we had another Space Marine 2 game, and the combat was just brilliant, right? The combat was exceptional. But this does feel like they added drama for the sake of drama, and I don't know, it just felt like in the first story, it made, like, I feel that, like, the first story was a lot more lore consistent, but it was still a great story. Like, the way that it ended was perfect. This story, it sounds like the people who created it are not 100% aware of the lore of the Imperium of Man, or specifically the Space Marines. They're not just regular soldiers. They're psycho-conditioned soldiers, so there's a big difference.
Garbage already. Total dog shit. Mind you, this is supposed to be someone who's hundreds of years old that has training on how to lead men and inspire his own troops, and instead he's engaging in petty squabbles like this. It's already stupid. And then it continues to go straight down the gutter. It gets worse. Sergeant Gadriel and Brother Chiron, or whatever his name is, the very Marines that are assigned to him by the captain, they start whispering behind his back, Titus's back. And these are supposed to be his battle brothers in arms, okay? These are supposed to be the dudes that uphold the Codex Astartes, and instead they...
Yeah, Gamza's got a point here. Like, I've read quite a few Space Marine novels. There are no examples of this happening that I know of. Maybe, like, obviously amongst the Trader Marines, it's a completely different story because the Trader Marines are all out for themselves, so this sort of bickering makes sense. Like, for instance, in one of the books I read on the Iron Warriors, I think it was, where Chaos Space Marines that were created from Space Marine gene seed were seen as lesser than Chaos. Sorry, I meant to say that Chaos Space Marines who were created from gene seed that was stolen from regular Space Marines were seen as inferior to Chaos Space Marines who got their gene seed from other Chaos Space Marines. So you see this sort of bigotry amongst the Trader Marines, and this sort of bickering, right, where they're really out for themselves, right? They're held together, but it's more by wanting to get to the top and fear rather than, like, whereas the regular Space Marines are the exact opposite. They have been psycho-conditioned to be loyal to each other, right? So it's not the sort of thing that I've ever really seen in novels with the Space Marines. And I think to compare it to other stories, like for instance, the original Dawn of War and Dawn of War 2, I think that those two games like are much more consistent with the lore of the Space Marines. This isn't to say that they're simple, but they're soldiers. They're psycho-conditioned to be soldiers. They're psycho-conditioned to follow orders, right? So this whole, like what you see with Sergeant Gadriel and Chiron, like, backstabbing, it's just not what you would see of Space Marines.
Start acting like kids, trading rumors and doubting his loyalty and his worthiness, all of this stuff. He's...
Now, I think, as much as Gamza has criticisms, I think that for the purpose of the story, because this is meant to be, it makes sense, like, not from a lore perspective, but it makes sense from a story perspective. So in the first story, in the first game, the ending, I'm not spoiling anything, hopefully, the ending of Space Marine 1 is that Titus ends up being taken by the Inquisition, right? And that's how he ends up on the Death Watch. So you can almost see that this second story is supposed to be his redemption arc. Whereas in the first story, he ended up not becoming a traitor, but he ended up being suspected of a traitor. In the second story, he ends up redeeming himself. But the problem is that, if it wasn't a Space Marine game about Space Marines, then it would be consistent with the lore. But this is just one of those examples where they decided to go against the law for the sake of having drama. Gamza is right to disagree with this because it's definitely not consistent with the law of the Space Marines. But, if it wasn't a Space Marine story, the story would be just fine. It's easy to criticize, but I honestly don't, I found the ending of the second story satisfying, at least in the story of Titus's arc, and with the reveal that the chaplain is Leonidas. But in terms of is it consistent with Space Marine lore, it's just a no.
Got your command and all. I'm just like, what is going on here? Who taught these Ultramarines to act like this? These are not psycho-conditioned and indoctrinated Marines. These are just like high school kids that have been stuffed into armor. It's ridiculous at this point. So this isn't how Space Marines work. Astartes don't gossip. They don't question their leaders in whispers. They fight, they kill, they follow orders. Turning Gadriel and Chiron into like gossiping chatterboxes kills everything that makes them who they are. So if anything, it makes the characters look significantly worse. And in my opinion, when I was playing this game, it took me completely out of the element. So instead of me focusing on gameplay, I'm like, why are these characters acting this way? I'm like, are they going to turn into chaos later on? Because that would be the only thing that would make sense. And then...
Yeah, I mean, that is a valid point. They do sound like Chaos Space Marines. The way that they bicker, that's pretty much, if you've ever read any books about Chaos Space Marines, that's pretty much how they are. They are, I don't want to say immature, but they're certainly out for themselves. They engage in politics and gossip because it's just simply put a way for them to move up. So, like I said, it's very inconsistent with Space Marine lore. Yeah.
Just when you think that it couldn't get worse, all right, we've got them questioning his orders and his command and his decisions. We've got people breaking rank. We got all kinds of crazy shit going on.
Well, that's the point that I missed when I put it a pause before. One of the scenes later in the game where Chiron charges into the Chaos ranks, I think that's an interesting part of the story, because it reveals that throughout the story that Chiron, he has a relationship with Chaos. He has a inherent hatred of Chaos, more than just what you would expect from someone who was psycho-conditioned and indoctrinated, right? And I think that part of the story was really good. So he broke ranks, but that's because he has a personal relationship with Chaos, right? Which he reveals later in the story that I can't reveal. That part of the story made sense. It's believable that, there could be, a perfect example of this is in the Space Wolves Omnibus. where in the book, at the beginning of the story with Ragnar Blackmane, how a fellow Space Marine that ends up becoming a fellow Space Marine with him was someone who was a mortal enemy during his life as a non-Space Marine. And so Ragnar Blackmane has to deal with how he's going to deal with accepting someone who was his mortal enemy as a fellow Space Marine. So in that context, it makes sense, but I don't know if it would make sense with the Space Marine, with the Ultramarines specifically, because the Ultramarines aren't Space Vikings. They're like, they are like the ultimate Space Marine, the Ultramarines, in terms of like they for them, the Codex Astartes is a religious book, right? So, I don't know, the idea of them gossiping, it sounds more like trading, but the part where Chiron breaks ranks and he charges after Chaos, you could see that happening because you could also see that as the forces of Chaos manipulating Chiron's emotions to potentially get the better of him.
Then you've got Sergeant Gadriel, who comes in and tries to kill Titus. He listens to the beckoning of a possessed astropath, somebody that he doesn't know. He's not friends. They're not part of like his chapter. This is ridiculous to think that he would then take this word of an astropath calling Titus a heretic, pull his gun out, and he's like, oh, yeah, I really don't know you, but you know what? It's time to kill my own lieutenant, who was reinstated personally and scrutinized by the chapter master himself. Yeah, it's time to try to kill this dude now. But in this game, it treats it just like a juicy twist. Oh yeah, look at...
Yeah, like I said, they would have killed Sergeant Gadriel. He would have been executed for pulling a pistol on a senior commander. Like 100%. There's no question about it. I can't think of any examples where it's happened, but guaranteed pulling a pistol on your sergeant is treason. Like, you know what I mean? It's heresy. So a Space Marine would not do that without an extremely good reason. And I don't think that there's enough evidence. Like, you know, it's almost unimaginable for a Space Marine to do that to a senior, right? Really unimaginable for us. Like I said, I just can't see it happening. And the fact that like Titus just let it go, no, no. There's no way. Like this would sow dissent in the ranks if they found out. There's no way that this would be allowed. And if the Inquisition found out about it, they would 100% have offed Sergeant Gadriel. So, and the chaplain 100% would have executed him. So, yeah, no.
That drama, like we're supposed to just gasp instead of shake our heads like, oh, I can't believe you would do that. It's ridiculous. The Ultramarines, they're supposed to be the Emperor's Angels of Death, okay? I know a lot of people don't like the Ultramarines, but be that as it may, okay? You have Gilliman that created the Codex Astartes. These are like rules that these chapters follow. A lot of them, not all of them. But anyways, it's like an unhinged soap opera with all these stupid characters. And then Gadriel doesn't even get punished for this. Titus just basically looks at him. He's like, it's not a big deal. It's understandable. Let's just go ahead and fight together. I'm like, dude, you used to be a captain of the Ultramarines. And your sergeant just tried to kill your ass, listening to a demon-possessed astropath, and you're just like, no big deal. That's called heresy.
I gotta be honest. One of the things that's interesting about the Imperium of Man is the fact that chaos is a pervasive threat anywhere. There is no way. It is possible that the Inquisition may have taken Sergeant Gadriel to interrogate him for heresy, but it's very unlikely. In fact, it's incredibly unlikely that he would just be let off like nothing happened. You know, what I mean? That's just not like, that's just like that. Like the Space Marines are extremely pragmatic. Like, and the idea of a fellow Space Marine turning on another, it would raise questions about whether or not Gadriel was possessed, whether or not he was turned to heresy, whether he's a heretic. You know, the Space Marines are not a liberal modern day army, right? They live in a universe where, you know, a single rogue psyker can open up a portal to hell. there's just no reason that they would have just let something like this go.
You forget what universe we're in? I thought Space Marines are supposed to root out heresy and the corruption of chaos. And here we got a guy listening to an actual possessed astropath from chaos, and it's no big deal. Are you kidding me? Where's the chaplain? The chaplain's more suspicious of Captain Titus, or I should say Lieutenant Titus, more than he is of this stupid sergeant that just tried to kill him. My brain begins to melt even trying to process this dog shit of a story. All right, let's dial this back a little bit. Here's the problem. Space Marines aren't human in the way that the writers always try them to make them. I think what it is it's just very poor writing. When you've got characters like Master Chief, you got characters like Doomslayer, there's a reason why these guys have far more gravity on screen than like Ultramarines. Why? It's because Chief is a man of very little words, very few words, I should say. And then you've got Slayer, has even less words. I mean, the dude says like what, 1-2 things for an entire game, and that's about it. And then, but you think when they're on screen, they tend to be more interesting. When you see these Space Marines bickering back and forth, and then it violates the rule again of writing. Show me, don't tell me. And they violate that rule because they sit there and they go, these Space Marines are psycho-indoctrinated.
Okay, I am going to say that, like, the one thing that I really liked about the game was the scene with Marneus Calgar, right? That scene where he drops down from the plane and starts shooting people, that was awesome. But despite that, yes, let's Gamza continue.
They're the cream of the crop. These dudes are super soldiers. They're super smart. They're always suspicious of heresy. They're always ready to fight. You know, they'll follow the commands regardless of anything. And then when you see them on screen, you can't display any of that. And instead, you're trying to like force this weird...
But yeah, I think that's kind of the point, is that the as Gamza said, the writers wrote them as if they were human. They're not human. Titus has been alive for centuries at this point. Right, I think, or a century or something like that, right? They're not human. They wouldn't have a human perspective. This is something that you would expect. So, in Dawn of War 2, the assault commander is a young Space Marine. So this is the sort of thing that you would expect from Space Marines who are quite young, who were only very recently taken from their world to become Space Marines. But it's not something that you would expect from a Space Marine who served for 100 years or more. You know, and they would just have a different perspective on the world than say regular humans would. You can't, like, to have them, like I said, it makes sense in other games where, like Bulletstorm that I've seen, where you have human soldiers, but it just doesn't make sense in the world of the Space Marines.
Weird, like, humanist drama onto the screen with these super soldiers. Just really think about this for a moment, okay? If you're not completely familiar with Warhammer 40k, Space Marines are taken as children, and they are not only experimented on and given all these extra organs and stuff, but psychologically they are completely reconditioned. You become an Ultramarine. Like, let's just say that you were born as George. You're not George anymore, okay? You are, like, whatever assigned name they're going to give you as an Ultramarine. You're an Ultramarine now. You're not George, who was born in some continent or whatever. That doesn't matter. You're an Ultramarine now. And you are psycho-conditioned to obey orders. If your captain gave you an order and you knew for a fact that you were going to die carrying out that order, that's exactly what you're going to do. You don't even second guess it. You're like, this is what I was built for. This is who I am.
Yeah, there are numerous examples of Space Marines doing this. They even when it comes to death, like, they're not afraid of it.
Here's my destiny, and you follow that command. This idea that you're going to be, like, questioning your commander, trying to kill him, talk shit about him. I'm like, what level of drama is this? It seems like they got writers that didn't even understand Warhammer 40k, and they're just like, here's a brief rundown of, like, what kind of goes on in this universe. Go ahead and just make up whatever the hell you want. And they're like, it's good enough. Whoever wrote this dog shit did a terrible job, absolutely terrible. Now, you guys know me. I like to end.
Alright, so this was my reaction to why Space Marine 2 failed by Gamza. Like I said, I did enjoy the Space Marine 2 game. Like, I really did. I thought it was, like, but I didn't, like I said, I didn't think about the writing. Like I said, I still think that Space Marine 2 is a great game, as long as you treat it for what it is. It's just a great game. You know what I mean? I wouldn't, like, this is what I would say is, I think this is one of the problems with making a video game, which is, or when you take something that's fiction and you turn it into a game, you always have the limitations of the fact that you have to take something that, you know, was meant for the medium of books, you know, and turn it into a video game. And then you have to, like, create some interesting story. You know, so it's one thing to criticize Space Marine 2, and there's reasons to criticize it, but I have to be honest, I don't know what they could have done to fix the story while still having drama. Because I think the problem is, the first Space Marine game had both. It had drama, but it was also consistent with the lore. The second game has drama, but it's not consistent with the lore. So it's like, you know, it's like, could they have done better? I mean, I don't know. But like I said, I still love Space Marine 2. I still think the game itself, if you take out the writing, I still think it's good. I think the writing's okay, but it doesn't match up to the original Space Marine. Alright, this was G-Man Gaming and Review's reaction to why Space Marine 2 failed. Most likely there'll be another video up, which is my reaction to I ended up reading the entire Starship Troopers book, so it's going to be my reaction to that. So that you should see that on the screen if you're interested. Otherwise, please like and subscribe if you haven't already done so. Sorry I haven't posted in ages. It just I've been doing other things. So this was G-Man Gaming and Reviews signing out.